When Amanda, a diligent employee at a mid-sized finance company, stumbles upon a suspicious spreadsheet, she discovers her charismatic boss, Andrew, has been embezzling millions through fake vendor accounts. Driven by anger and a sense of justice, she risks everything to expose his crimes, only to uncover a deeper conspiracy involving senior executives willing to do whatever it takes to protect themselves. As Amanda becomes a scapegoat in their desperate cover-up, she turns to a fearless journalist to bring the shocking truth to light. But with powerful enemies watching her every move, Amanda soon learns that uncovering the truth might come at a cost she never expected. Will justice prevail, or will Amanda pay the ultimate price for seeking it? I've always considered myself a pretty ordinary person. I work hard, keep my head down, and try not to make waves. 5 years in the same company had taught me one thing: in the corporate world, it's safer to stay invisible. But no amount of keeping my head down could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. It all began on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, sipping my second cup of coffee and trying to untangle the mess that was our department's quarterly financial report. Andrew, my boss, strode into the office like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. Recently promoted to regional manager, Andrew was the kind of boss who thrived on power. He was always in a designer suit, carrying a smug grin that made it clear he believed he was better than the rest of us. "Team meeting in 5, Andrew barked as he passed by my desk, not even bothering to make eye contact. His voice was sharp, commanding, the kind that could make you feel 2 inches tall. I sighed, closed the spreadsheet, and grabbed my notebook. Meetings with Andrew were always a nightmare, long-winded monologues about his brilliance, thinly veiled insults about how we weren't meeting his impossible standards, and, of course, his endless reminders that the company's success was all thanks to him. The meeting started as predictably as ever. Andrew was standing at the front of the room, pacing like a general before his troops, while the rest of us sat in silence, nodding at the appropriate moments. Then it happened. Andrew was projecting a sales report onto the screen when he accidentally opened the wrong file. For a brief moment, a spreadsheet popped up. It was only visible for a few seconds before he quickly closed it, muttering something about wrong document. But in those few seconds, I saw enough to make my stomach twist. The spreadsheet wasn't like any I'd seen before. It was a list of transactions, large ones, with amounts that didn't make sense. And at the top of the file was a name that was unmistakable: Andrews. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was a personal file he'd opened by mistake, something unrelated to work. But the image of that spreadsheet stayed with me. There was something about it, something that didn't feel right. After the meeting, I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to that file. Why would Andrew have a list of transactions tied to his name? And why did the amounts look so suspicious? By the time the office started to clear out that evening, I had made up my mind. I needed to know what that file was. I waited until everyone had left, pretending to stay late to finish up some work. Once the office was empty, I made my move. Logging into the shared drive, I searched through Andrew's folders. My hands were trembling, a mix of fear and adrenaline surging through me. It didn't take long to find it, the same spreadsheet he had accidentally opened during the meeting. I clicked on it, and as it loaded, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just any spreadsheet. It was a ledger. A detailed record of transactions from fake vendor accounts, all funneling money into a single private bank account. Andrew's private bank account. At first, I thought I must be misunderstanding something. There had to be an explanation, right? But as I went through the file line by line, it became clear: Andrew was stealing from the company. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake invoices, all approved under Andrew's name. And the account had been active for years. By the time I finished reviewing the spreadsheet, I realized he had embezzled nearly $2 million. I sat back in my chair, stunned. I'd heard about things like this happening, but I never imagined I'd see it up close. My mind raced with questions. How had he managed to pull this off for so long without anyone noticing? And why? Andrew was already making more money than any of us could dream of. What was he doing with it? I knew I should report it immediately. But as I stared at the screen, fear began to creep in. Andrew wasn't just my boss, he was the golden boy of the company. Everyone admired him, from the executives to the interns. If I accused him of stealing and couldn't prove it, I'd be the one who'd pay the price. The rational part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But deep down, I knew I couldn't do that. What Andrew was doing wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Andrew had spent years treating the rest of us like we were beneath him, like we didn't matter. He'd forced us to work late nights, cut corners to meet his impossible deadlines, and then taken all the credit for our work. And now I knew why. He wasn't just ambitious, he was a thief. I spent the next hour copying the file and gathering as much information as I could. If I was going to confront this, I needed to be prepared. By the time I left the office that night, I had a plan. The first step was to confirm everything I'd found. If Andrew was embezzling money, there had to be a trail, a way to trace the fake vendors back to him. And if I could find that, I'd have everything I needed to take him down. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that spreadsheet. Andrew's name, the fake vendor accounts, the massive sums of money being siphoned off, it was all I could think about. But fear and anger weren't the only emotions swirling in my mind. There was a sense of responsibility too. I couldn't just ignore what I'd found. If Andrew was stealing from the company, it wasn't just some faceless corporation being hurt, it was all of us. My co-workers. People who worked hard, who stayed late, who skipped family dinners to meet deadlines. Andrew was stealing not just money but opportunities and recognition that rightfully belonged to others. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed to move forward, but I had to be smart about it. If Andrew found out what I was doing before I had enough proof, he could crush me. I'd seen how ruthless he could be with anyone who crossed him. At work, I tried to act normal, but it wasn't easy. Every time Andrew walked by, I felt a wave of tension ripple through me. His confident swagger, his loud laugh, it all seemed so much more sinister now that I knew the truth. I started my investigation quietly. During my lunch breaks, I researched the fake vendor names from the spreadsheet. Some of them were clever, generic enough to look legitimate, like Horizon Consulting or Summit Logistics. But the more I dug, the more obvious it became that they didn't exist. No websites, no business registrations, no online presence at all. They were nothing but shells. One name in particular caught my attention, Nova Solutions. It showed up more frequently than any of the others, and the amounts tied to it were significantly larger. It wasn't just a shell account, it was the key to Andrew's entire scheme. Over the next few days, I devoted every spare moment to tracing Nova Solutions. And then, I found it, a registered business in the next state over. The owner's name? Andrew's brother. My stomach flipped. That was it. Proof that Andrew wasn't just approving fake vendor payments, he was funneling the money directly to his own family. But I couldn't stop there. I needed to find out where the money went after it hit his brother's account. It wasn't easy. I couldn't exactly subpoena bank records or hack into private accounts, but I didn't need to. Andrew, as it turned out, wasn't as careful as he thought. In his arrogance, he'd left a trail of breadcrumbs. Payments to Nova Solutions coincided with personal purchases that were impossible to miss: first-class plane tickets, 5-star hotel stays, a brand-new luxury SUV he'd been showing off at the office for months. He wasn't just stealing, he was flaunting it. As I pieced everything together, I started to realize just how big this was. Andrew hadn't just been embezzling money, he was running a full-scale operation. Fake vendors, real payments, laundering the money through his brother's business, and spending it like it was Monopoly cash. By the end of the week, I had a stack of evidence, screenshots of the spreadsheet, records of the fake vendors, proof of their ties to Andrew's brother, and a timeline showing how the stolen money had been spent. But even as I looked over it all, I knew it wasn't enough. Andrew was smart. He knew how to manipulate people, how to cover his tracks just enough to create plausible deniability. If I wanted to bring him down, I needed to catch him in the act. That's when the idea hit me. I could bait him into exposing himself. The plan was risky, dangerous, even, but it was the only way. I'd create a fake discrepancy in the accounts, something small enough that it wouldn't raise suspicion but significant enough to make Andrew notice. Then, I'd monitor his activity. If he tried to fix the discrepancy by deleting or altering files, I'd have all the proof I needed. It took me a few days to set everything up. I created a dummy entry in one of our shared reports, a payment to a fake vendor I called Orion Services. The amount was small, just enough to catch Andrew's attention without raising alarms from anyone else. Then, I waited. Sure enough, it didn't take long. Late one night, long after most of the office had gone home, I saw Andrew's profile pop up in the shared drive. My heart raced as I watched him open the report and pause on the dummy entry I'd planted. For a moment, I thought he might let it slide, but then he did exactly what I'd hoped. He deleted it. What he didn't know was that I had installed a screen recording program on my computer. Every keystroke, every mouse click, everything he did was captured. By the time he logged off, I had undeniable proof that he was tampering with records. But that wasn't the only surprise that night. As I reviewed the footage, I noticed something strange. Andrew wasn't just deleting the dummy entry I'd created, he was going through other files as well, erasing transactions, altering dates, and even creating new entries to cover his tracks. He knew someone was onto him. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was trying to bury the evidence, to destroy any trace of his crimes before anyone could catch him. If I hadn't acted when I did, I might have lost my chance to stop him altogether. By the time I left the office that night, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't wait any longer. Andrew was panicking, and that made him dangerous. It was time to expose him. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. Today was the day I was going to expose Andrew. For weeks, I had gathered evidence in secret, but now it was time to put everything in motion. There was no turning back. If I didn't act now, Andrew might find a way to destroy all the evidence, and then I'd have nothing. I double-checked the folder on my laptop containing everything I had collected, screenshots of the fraudulent transactions, evidence linking the fake vendor accounts to Andrew and his brother, proof of his lavish purchases, and, of course, the screen recording showing him deleting files in real time. It was airtight. But the real challenge wasn't collecting the evidence, it was making sure it got into the right hands. Andrew was well connected, not just within the company but outside of it too. If I handed this over to the wrong person, they might tip him off, and he'd have plenty of time to cover his tracks or turn the situation against me. I decided to go straight to the top, the company's board of directors. They were the only people with enough authority to take action against someone as powerful as Andrew. But I wasn't naive. I couldn't simply walk into their office with a folder and expect them to believe me. Andrew was a master manipulator. He'd built a reputation as a star employee, the golden boy of the company. If I accused him without solid proof, they might dismiss me, or worse, accuse me of trying to sabotage him. I knew I needed to stay anonymous. So, I created an email account under a fake name and drafted a detailed message outlining everything I had discovered. I attached all the evidence, including the screen recording, and made sure to write in a way that sounded professional and credible. As I hovered over the send button, my hands shook. This was it. Once I sent this email, there would be no going back. If the board decided to investigate, Andrew would know someone had exposed him. And if they didn't act, I'd be left vulnerable, with no protection against whatever revenge Andrew might take. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed send. The next few days were pure agony. I couldn't focus at work, constantly glancing at my phone, waiting for some sign that the board had received my email and was taking it seriously. Andrew, meanwhile, was acting normal, or as normal as someone like him could act. He strutted around the office like usual, barking orders and cracking jokes with the executives. But I could tell something was different. He was more on edge than usual, snapping at people for minor mistakes and spending an unusual amount of time in his office with the door closed. He knew something was wrong. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, it happened. Andrew was called into a meeting with HR. It wasn't on the schedule, and the fact that it was sudden made the whole office buzz with curiosity. People whispered as he walked past, his usual confident grin replaced with a tight, forced expression. I tried to play it cool, pretending to be absorbed in a report, but my heart was racing. This was it. The board had acted. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. By the time Andrew came out, he looked pale and shaken. He didn't say a word to anyone as he walked straight to his office and slammed the door. The whispers around the office grew louder, but no one dared to approach him. The next morning, Andrew didn't show up to work. Instead, an email went out from the company's CEO, announcing that Andrew had been placed on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation into irregularities in the company's finances. The email was vague, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the office. For the rest of the day, the atmosphere was electric. People were speculating non-stop about what Andrew might have done. Some thought it was just a misunderstanding, while others were convinced he'd been caught doing something shady. I kept my head down, pretending to be as clueless as everyone else, but inside, I was bursting with a mix of relief and anticipation. I thought that would be the end of it. Andrew was out, the investigation had started, and all I had to do was wait for the truth to come to light. But I was wrong. Things were about to get a lot more complicated. That evening, as I was leaving the office, I noticed a black car parked across the street. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a busy area, and cars came and went all the time. But as I walked toward the bus stop, the car pulled out and started following me. My stomach tightened. Was I being paranoid, or was someone actually following me? I decided to test it. Instead of heading straight home, I turned down a side street and walked into a coffee shop. I ordered a drink and sat by the window, pretending to scroll through my phone while keeping an eye on the street. Sure enough, the black car parked just a few spots down from the coffee shop. I didn't recognize the car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. Was it Andrew? Had he somehow found out I was the one who exposed him? Or was it someone else, someone he had sent to keep an eye on me? I stayed in the coffee shop for over an hour, hoping the car would leave. But it didn't. Finally, I decided to call a rideshare to take me home. As I got into the car, I glanced back at the black car. It didn't follow me, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. That night, I double-checked all the locks on my doors and windows. I told myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You don't know who you're messing with." The email itself was short and chilling. "Stay out of this if you know what's good for you." My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Someone knew. Someone knew I was the one who had exposed Andrew. But I didn't back down. If anything, the email only strengthened my resolve. I'd come too far to stop now. Whoever sent that message wanted me to be afraid, but I wasn't going to let fear control me. The investigation was still ongoing, and I knew the evidence I provided was enough to bring Andrew down. But now I had to protect myself too. If Andrew was desperate enough to send someone after me, or even threaten me directly, there was no telling what he might do next. I decided to take extra precautions. I backed up all the evidence I had collected onto an encrypted USB drive and hid it in a place no one would think to look. I also made copies of the files and sent them to a trusted friend, along with instructions to turn them over to the authorities if anything happened to me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. The tension around the office had reached a boiling point by the time the internal investigation was in full swing. Rumors swirled about Andrew. Some said he had been skimming money for years, others speculated he had a gambling addiction or ties to organized crime. No one really knew the truth, but everyone was hungry for answers. And so was I. For days, I'd been looking over my shoulder, wondering who sent me that threatening email. The black car hadn't reappeared, but the message lingered in my mind like a warning bell I couldn't ignore. Someone out there knew what I had done. And they weren't happy about it. But then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any stranger, the bombshell dropped. It started with an emergency all-staff meeting. We were called into the conference room by the company's CEO, a man who rarely made appearances outside of corporate retreats and holiday parties. His presence alone was enough to make everyone sit up straight and pay attention. "I want to address the rumors that have been circulating," he began, his tone grave. "The internal investigation has uncovered evidence of significant financial misconduct involving Andrew Hayes. Effective immediately, Mr. Hayes has been terminated, and the findings have been turned over to law enforcement." There was a collective gasp. Termination was one thing, but law enforcement? This was serious. But then came the twist. However, the CEO continued, "The investigation has also revealed that Mr. Hayes did not act alone. Several other individuals within the company were complicit in his actions, actively assisting in the embezzlement and cover-up." The room froze. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, murmurs breaking out in disbelief. The CEO raised a hand to silence the chatter. "At this time, we are unable to disclose the identities of those involved due to the ongoing investigation. But I want to assure you that we are cooperating fully with authorities and taking every step necessary to ensure justice is served." My stomach dropped. Complicit? Other individuals? This wasn't just about Andrew anymore, this was bigger than I ever imagined. Over the next 48 hours, the office became a war zone. HR representatives and auditors were everywhere, pulling people into meetings, reviewing files, and asking pointed questions. Tensions were sky high, and it felt like everyone was under suspicion. Then came the second bombshell. Late one afternoon, I was called into a meeting with HR and one of the company's lawyers. The atmosphere was tense, and I could feel the blood drain from my face as I sat down. "Ms. Harper," the HR manager began, looking at me with a stern expression. "We've been reviewing your involvement in the Andrew Hayes investigation." My heart pounded. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but the way she said it made my stomach twist. "We've received an anonymous tip suggesting that you may have been involved in the financial discrepancies we're investigating." "What?" I stammered, completely blindsided. "That's ridiculous. I'm the one who exposed Andrew." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but cutting. "We're aware of your claims, but we also need to consider the possibility that this was an attempt to shift blame. After all, you were the one who accessed confidential financial records without authorization." I froze. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. Someone was framing me. "You're accusing me of working with Andrew?" I said, my voice trembling. "That's insane. Check the evidence I submitted. It's all there." "We have," the HR manager said, her expression unreadable. "And while your evidence does implicate Mr. Hayes, we've also discovered inconsistencies in your activity logs. There are entries suggesting that you accessed files and made edits long before the timeline you provided us." My stomach dropped. I hadn't made those edits. But then it hit me, Andrew. He must have found out someone was onto him and planted false activity in my name. That's why he'd been tampering with files. He wasn't just covering his tracks, he was setting me up as a scapegoat. I tried to explain, but it was clear they weren't convinced. We'll need to continue our investigation before making any determinations, the HR manager said. In the meantime, you're being placed on administrative leave. Please hand over your company laptop and badge. As I left the office that day, my world felt like it was crumbling around me. The person who had sent that anonymous email, the one warning me to stay out of it, wasn't just trying to scare me. They were part of this. Andrew hadn't acted alone, and now his accomplices were doing everything they could to protect themselves, even if it meant destroying me in the process. At home, I went through the evidence I still had on my personal computer. I knew I had to act fast. If the company was turning against me, I needed to go to someone who would listen. Someone outside the corporate machine. I decided to contact the investigative journalist who had covered high-profile corporate scandals in the past. I sent her everything, the files, the screen recordings, the timeline, even details about the threats I'd received. She responded within hours. "This is big," her email read. "I'm going to look into this immediately. But you need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, the people involved won't hesitate to protect themselves at any cost." 2 weeks later, the story broke. The journalist had uncovered a web of corruption far larger than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just Andrew, several senior executives were involved, including members of the board of directors. They had been funneling money through fake vendors for years, with Andrew acting as the fall guy. The journalist's investigation revealed how they tried to frame me as a way to tie up loose ends. She even published emails between Andrew and the accomplices, discussing how to manipulate the investigation and shift blame onto someone expendable. The fallout was immediate. The CEO resigned in disgrace. Half the board stepped down, and multiple executives were arrested. Andrew's scheme wasn't just a scandal, it was the biggest corporate fraud case in the company's history. As for me, I was cleared of all suspicion. The journalist's story made it clear that I was a whistleblower, not a co-conspirator. But the damage had been done. My name had been dragged through the mud, and I couldn't go back to the company after everything that had happened. But I didn't care. I had exposed the truth. And while it had come at a cost, I knew I had done the right thing. The last twist came a month later. I received a letter in the mail, no return address, no signature. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message typed in bold letters. "You're lucky you got away this time. Stay quiet, or next time, you won't." Along with the note was a USB drive. I hesitated, my hands shaking, but curiosity got the better of me. When I plugged it into my computer, I found a single file, a spreadsheet, this time filled with transactions from a different company. It didn't take long to realize what it was. Another scam. Another Andrew. And just like that, I knew this wasn't over.